we had developed enough firepower on both sides of the Atlantic, along with the missiles necessary to deliver them, which the Nazis had basically invented in World War II, right? It was all Nazi scientists who invented rockets, and they were all taken by the Americans after the Second World War to work on the American space program, basically. And so by the 1950s, we had the missiles to deliver the damn things too. So not only were the psychologists who were thinking about things sort of shorted out about what happened in World War II, for good reason, and then of course all the Stalinist horrors were starting to be revealed at that point, although it took Western intellectuals like 30 years before they gave them any credence at all. I think Jean-Paul Sartre was still a member of the Communist Party up until 1970. It was very common, particularly among French intellectuals. You know, even though the news was getting out, careful observers like George Orwell had pretty much figured out by the late 30s that not all was right in the paradise of Stalin. But, you know, people thought he was a right-winger and didn't listen to him much, even though he was a left-winger. So these existential phenomenologists, they're trying to figure out, okay, we got a big problem here. The belief systems are seriously going sideways. And there's some indication, you know, there's some individual responsibility for that, of some indeterminate nature. Like, if you live in a country where everyone's turned into a fascist murderer, like, is that your fault? Well, you know, it's not obvious that an individual should be held responsible for the actions of an entire country. But then again, the country's made up of individuals, so it's a very difficult problem to solve. You know, and one of the tenets of Western law is that you don't hold an individual responsible for the actions of the group, even if he or she happens to be a member, willingly or unwillingly, of that group. But you can't ignore the fact that all these things were made up of people. And then you also can't ignore the fact that it was individuals who were doing the terrible things that were being done to people. You know, so in Auschwitz, for example, one of the little tricks that the guards used to do was to, you know, they'd bring the Jews off the freight cars. A lot of them had died in the freight cars because they were packed in there like this, you know, so lots of them would suffocate, or the old ones would die, or the little kids would die, and that was okay, you know. And then along the outside of the freight cars, especially if it was winter, well, it's like 20 below, and so the ones on the outside would freeze, but, you know, you were going to get rid of them anyway, so that was just convenient mostly. So then you'd take them to Auschwitz, and they'd all spill out, speaking different languages, torn up from their family, you know, as miserable as people can possibly be. And then one trick was to have, you know, someone who was not quite dead enough pick up a sack of wet salt, so that's 100 pounds, and carry it from one side of the compound to the other, and then back, you know, one side and then back. And, you know, you don't want to be thinking about these camps as like a football field. These bloody things were cities. They were big. They held tens of thousands of people. And so there's some guard, he thinks that's a pretty good joke. And it's not just a few people that are like that. And we found out from the Stanford prison experiment, which every psychologist likes to think of as immoral, you know, because we actually discovered something with it, that if you gave ordinary people the opportunity to be fascist barbarians, in 6 days, 30% of them would be. And, you know, what we learned from that is that social psychologists shouldn't run the Stanford prison experiment. That's not the right conclusion to draw. So these phenomenologists we're all concerned about this. It's like, what the hell should we do about that? So they're starting to think about how belief systems are constructed. And so the first proposition that they make is that we should treat the reality that we're dealing with as psychologists, we should treat human experience as that reality. And so the reality for you, from a phenomenological perspective, is everything you experience. They assume everything you experience is real, and they also assume that you can't actually get more real than that. And so your consciousness, whatever that is real, and your dreams are real, and your emotions are real, and your pain is real, which is a really useful thing to think if you want to make sure that you're not going to hurt people. You know, you kind of have to think that maybe pain should be treated as a fundamental reality instead of as an epiphenomena of some material substrate. And so that's their first perspective. And they took that from Heidegger, because Heidegger thought that Western philosophy had got off on the wrong track, you know, 3,000 years ago, because we didn't really concentrate on being itself as the fundamental mystery. And so the fundamental mystery is, why the hell is there anything? And since there is something, experiential being, what are its fundamental elements? And so that's the phenomenological stance. It's not the same as a scientific approach, because it starts with a different presupposition. You know, the scientific presupposition, roughly speaking, is that things are, the objectively real elements of things are the most real elements. And there's no sense complaining about that, because it's an approach that works tremendously well for many, many things, including making hydrogen bombs, for example. But it's also reasonable to think that, well, it might not be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and maybe you could also suspect that the fact that we can manufacture hydrogen bombs also might indicate that there's something a trifle off with our fundamental belief systems, scientific though they may be. And that was certainly something that concerned Heidegger, even though he got all tangled up with the Nazis. So the phenomenologists were trying to take apart experience as such, and they made some hypotheses and then some observations. So the first is that we're going to assume that your experience, like experience itself, is real. Now, just because dreams are real and pain is real doesn't mean, and like objects that we can all perceive are real, doesn't mean you should put them all in the same category. Like my dreams are not in the same category of reality as this table, because you don't have access to my dreams and you have access to the table. But that doesn't mean that my dreams and my pains and my emotions aren't real. They're real. So that's the first. Now you should note that this is a proposition. What they're saying is, let's act as if that's true, and then work from those premises and see what happens, see where we can get with it. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, because at the bottom of a theory you always have to put an assumption. Because otherwise your theory would be 100% right and would cover everything, and it doesn't. So you have to throw an assumption somewhere in there at the bottom and say, okay, we're not questioning that. That's the starting point. So, and you have to do that, because you're ignorant. You don't have a full theory.